Ok, creo que estamos listos. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos en esta charla. Esta charla es parte del ciclo de conferencias de Sonamaco, que no sería posible gracias a Fundación Jumex, Arte Contemporáneo, a quienes agradecemos. Y damos la bienvenida hoy a Irene Tsatsos, curadora, y Lorena Wolfer, artista, quienes van a tener una conversación sobre Below the Underground. Gracias por estar aquí.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to be speaking in English, and thank you for your indulgence in that. Thank you, Rami, for the translation, and Ana and Diego for your support in helping pull this particular talk together. It's very much a pleasure to be here with Lorena Wolfer, and hopefully joining us will be Michelle Fiedler as well, two of around a dozen researchers and writers that have been a part of a project that started as far back as 2012. The project is called Below the Underground, Renegade Art and Action in 1990s Mexico. And it came out of a very particular experience I had in Guadalajara in 1997 or 98. The record is unclear, and after 5 years of research, it still wasn't able to be clarified, but it was an experience that involved hearing a rumor at an art fair in Guadalajara about a performance or a kind of intervention that was taking place on a roof of a building there, and it drew an audience that really could. It basically existed as a story that continued to be told, but sort of fell into. It became forgotten. And a number of years later, when I was thinking about how to engage with around this project, I remembered this rumor, and I began calling colleagues who were in Guadalajara at this time, nearly 15 years prior, and everybody remembered hearing about it, but they couldn't quite remember what it was, and that just started a trajectory of research around forgotten practices or nearly forgotten projects. I'll continue with that. We're going to talk, I'll just describe the project and show a few images that came out of this research, and then hopefully we can turn the conversation toward and Lorena can speak to what she brought to the project as well, and then talk about what this has opened up. Let's see. The image at the top on the left, this piece right here, is what started the rumor. It was a rooftop piece. It was a group of people just hearing about this project and making their way there, and then being met by a handful of artists who were there describing this intervention they had done on the roof. I'm going to back up a minute and describe the origin of the project. Below the Underground, Renegade Art in Action in 1990s Mexico is part of a larger project, a larger research project that was funded by the Getty called Pacific Standard Time, Latin America, Los Angeles. The idea was to investigate histories around this giant region, this kind of nebulous region. For me, I chose to look at Mexico City, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. So I began doing this research, and I took a trip to Mexico City and visited Ex Teresa. And in the course of doing these conversations, no one heard of this work that took place on this roof, or maybe they only heard of it, as I said, but couldn't remember who was involved. But it was a curator at Ex Teresa that wrote to me about 2 months after my first trip here for the research to say that an artist from Guadalajara had come in and shown his portfolio to them, and that's what helped us identify this work by Grupo Incidental. The idea of so much of these practices that interested me in this time was that it was artists creating social spaces and political actions. There's obviously a long history of this, but an interesting aspect of this history is how much of it can get lost. You know, we're talking about projects that don't necessarily generate product. There isn't necessarily a tangible outcome. in many cases, the most tangible outcome is the story itself. Here on the right is an image of work by Elvira Santamaria. We had video documentation and an enlarged photographic image of 2 different performances, interventions that she did on the street. And to the left, you can see a group of people sitting on the floor. They are engaging with a series of audio elements that were produced by Daniel Morales, who often produced stories that he would then intervene in bus routes in Mexico City. The first piece that we saw was an image by Andrea Ferreira, whose head was wrapped in rope. The kind of spiral that she generated, the torbellino, was a recurring metaphor for me in this project. The spiral of Mexico City, the spiral of this research, the idea of starting with an idea like this rooftop piece that ends up being somewhere on a circle that goes in and comes out again, became a very strong metaphor for me and for members of my team. And in this case, we showed the original drawing that Andrea did on a map. She identified 13 points on the map, and over the course of 13 hours, she went to each of these locations, wrapped herself up in a spiral of rope, unwrapped herself and left a little mark of little piece of rope at that location, and then went on to the next site. So what we did was enlarge the map and put the photographs from each site, the documentation photographs from each site on the map. And you would climb up this ladder in the gallery, another social space within the gallery that was kind of centered by this project of Andrea's. So much of what intrigued us as well were illicit practices, things that were done in a kind of pseudo-legal way. There was a publication that we very much appreciated called Casper. There were 13 issues produced. They were often comprised of unauthorized imagery. And we attempted to, and they also included posters. So each of these 13 issues had a poster in them. And we kind of attempted to get permission to reproduce these posters, but when it became too hard to, we just reproduced them anyway and allowed our visitors to take copies of the posters. In fact, yesterday, I think it was, or 2 days ago, at Material, I saw that that there's been an invitation extended, in a sense, to continue to do this because a younger publishing initiative in Mexico City connected with an artist who had the original 13 sets, and that artist, who isn't named, gave the issues to this publishing group for them to produce their own illicit copies. So I'm enjoying seeing this generation after generation continue that tradition. Here is a wonderful piece by 2 artists who are sitting in this room right now, Monica Meyer and Victor Lerma, Pinto Miraya. And the piece, Justicia y Democracia, is both of and informing the ongoing Pinto Miraya archive. And the work is being discussed here in this context by Amy Sarah Carroll, who is a contributor to the book that I will also mention a little bit more about in a moment. This project is so expansive and it's so hard for me to talk about in a short amount of time that I'm thinking of this hopefully as an invitation to you to get more information about the project. But it consisted of 26 artists and collectives, 11 researchers and authors in the book, 3 artist residencies, 4 exhibitions came out of this research, 3 artist residencies, 2 publications, a performance festival, and 1 website. So Amy Sarah Carroll's presentation here was an element of the performance festival. Another element was a performance by Lorena Wolfer, who is here activating her installation in the exhibition Below the Underground, working with Amy, who's pictured here again. Artemisa Clark is an artist based in Los Angeles who was also a part of the performance festival. she was responding to the work of Emma Villanueva, who also did figure drawing classes, free figure drawing classes, although in Emma's case they were on the streets of Mexico and other cities in the country. Like Emma, Artemisa was engaging the audience, talking back at people who were viewing her while drawing her body. And Katia Tararo, also in this audience, was a part of the performance festival as well. So this may be my last slide. Yes. There's the entrance to our gallery and part of where this exhibition manifested. But in fact, as I said, I think of the exhibition as something that just goes beyond this one show. You've been offered this gallery guide, this bilingual gallery guide that accompanied the exhibition. I want to, by the way, thank Jumex as well for the support they have given to the project in addition to the Getty. And the other thing I have to show and tell is mock-ups of the book itself. So if anybody's interested in catching me, I'm not going to pass this around, but if you're interested, I can show you what the insides of the book will look like, sort of. And the book, you know, in keeping with the spirit of the time and more importantly, the spirit of the work, is going to be bound in a Ziploc bag that will be covered. It will have a silk screen print on it. It will be accompanied by the checklist. It will be accompanied by some other material, including a CD that was produced by Sonido Apocalitzen, who is a part of the show. There are many more artists, obviously, in the project than I can discuss. Others, Diesnofe Concreto, are in this room. Other people are in this room. So I hope if you're interested, the book will be available, and I'm going to pass around this notebook, so you can give me your email, and when it's available later this spring, I will contact you and we can figure out how to get you a copy. So that's a summary, a very brief and very incomplete summary of the research and the exhibition that it resulted in, and I wanted to pass it over to Lorena now.
Hi, so it's kind of odd for me to be speaking in English, but I have kind of agreed to do this so that Irene can understand what it is that I'm saying. So I will be translated into Spanish, which again is ridiculous, but you know. So I want to thank Irene for inviting me to this conversation and to be part of this project. I think that one of the first things that was very interesting about this project is that it is possibly the first project. We just had an opening a week ago at MUAC with this other show that documents performance art in Mexico. But basically, this is one of the first projects that looks back on that period. And I think that my position here is peculiar. Michelle should be coming soon, but I'm the only one on this side of the conversation who was actually there at this time. So I think that, in a sense, my role is kind of like to bear witness. Although, you know, Monica and Victor are here, and Katia, who is my dear and adored friend, is here, and 19 Concreto members are kind of like roaming around. But anyway, I like this idea of bearing witness. So Irene invited me to be part of this project from the very beginning. We basically underwent, I don't know how long it was, but maybe for like a year. We did like a year of research for this project, and we discussed a number of things. And the first thing that we discussed and that Irene brought to the table was, how do you do a performance exhibition that is not only about showing photographs and videos and having very long, you know, explanations underneath the photos and the videos. Also, Maribel is here, who's also been one of the main figures who's preserved the memory of performance art. She's in charge of the archive at Exteresa, so this is also kind of like a conversation amongst friends. So I want to start by just reading very quickly something that Andrea Ferreira, whose work we just saw, wrote. It's my love declaration to her, who's also a dear friend. And with Katia, we've been a dynamic trio on and off. So it's a way for her to bring her here, but also because she is part of the show. Her ideas are also part of the conceptual, I think, backbone of the project. And so I want to read this that she wrote about this phrase that is used throughout the show, which is volver a acordarse es volver a mentir. To remember is to lie again. And so Andrea wrote, the action of remembering something each time it is done contributes to generate a new memory, the memory of what has already been remembered, and every time it is repeated, it will nourish that vast, strange, and incomprehensible sea that is the mind, inventor of interpretive systems that, however much we may try with impulse, are not divorced from the subjective planes of experiences. If the memory is backed up by evidence, records, photographs, documents, more solid theories can be constructed. While it is true that accessing as many clues as possible regarding an event or a person will bring us closer to the facts, entrecomillado, we must not forget that the construction of meaning is based on the codes employed to gather all the clues and that grant them coherence. In the search for meaning, we appeal to systems that produce order in certain directions, in certain ways. There's always an emotional implication. There are intentions and interests that will lead us to follow a resolution and lose sight of the rest of the map. So my question here is, what map did we create? What is this part that we are showing and that we constructed? And so one of the first things that I want to say is there's this phrase in Spanish que es, no es lo mismo pero es igual. And here is, no es lo mismo y no es igual, no? Which translates in English really badly because it's not the same and it's not the same. The work that is shown in this exhibition is work that was always positioned in the margins, and that's very important to remember because when we construct a memory, and especially because some of the works here in this show happened in different places at different times and in very different circumstances. I would say political, artistical. It's very easy, I guess, to forget where we were positioned. And in this act of bearing witness, I can say that we were positioned in the margins. And, again, I'm talking about Katia, I'm talking about Monica, I'm talking about where we were in regards to, the art world, the established art world that we are now sitting inside of, peculiar. I have to say, I had never been to Sonamaco, will probably never come back. It's nice to be here, just won't come back. I just came for Irene. And she's never been here either. But it is peculiar that we're presenting this book here, It is kind of un encontronazo de sentido. It's like a clash of senses, just like coming here to present this. So I just want to remember that it's no es lo mismo y no es igual. That which we're remembering was very different. The work that was being produced in Monterrey and Guadalajara was, belonged to a certain realm. The work that we were producing in Mexico City, the whole scene at Exteresa was different. The whole scene at Exteresa in relation to La Panadería en Temístocles was dramatically different, and we were positioned and continue to be positioned in very different places. So I think it's very important to bear that in mind. Again, in the show that just opened at MOAC last week, Sol also did this peculiar thing that Irene ended up doing, which was, grouping things that weren't originally part of a group. Again, we're lying, these are narratives, these are constructions, but in our narrative, we were never part of the same groups with some of the people that we're, being placed next to. So I think it's, important to remember that. The other thing is, this is, if we bear that in mind, it's also important to talk about how we've recorded performance art and not criticized performance art throughout time, which is, I think, something that was done in the show as well. For a very long time, there was this idea that performance art couldn't be analyzed because it was real time, because it wasn't representation. There are all these kind of like ideas, I would say kind of like old school ideas about performance art not being able to be analyzed. And I think this is an analysis. Certain works were selected. I find that piece by Andrea Torbellino is a beautiful piece, and it still, very much speaks about Mexico City, this voracious, completely mad place that we live in that somehow each morning, works again. And so, I think it's important to also bear that in mind. I remember, every single time in every conversation, we've had throughout the years. With Katia, I remember her setting up for Las Perras en Celo way back when, just, minutes before the performance, you guys were late. So I remember, all these things that happened, and then the work that was presented, and then there's this rereading and rewriting of that history. And so I think that in this rereading and rewriting of that history, there's also a statement in regards to what worked in performance and what didn't. We often talk about performance like it was this one this like homogeneous thing where everything had the same value, and it didn't. For somebody who defended performance art and who did performance art for a very long time, I defend the discipline, but I think that a very large percentage of its production is horrible. I'm never afraid to say that. And so the work that is here is the work that was pertinent, that was opening, spaces, that was saying something in the sea of all these other kind of like experiences and experiments that were being produced. Another one is, it's also an analysis of that particular moment in history. Maybe, some of you, I think most of you, except for my daughter and her friend, I think you're all pretty old to have been there. But I think we often forget what was happening back then. And what was happening, I wanna read a quote by Pilar Villela, who I also want to kind of like bring to the conversation. And what she told me in an interview that I conducted with her for this show was, the 90s were either the beginning or the end of a country, and in a conscious or subconscious manner, the symbolic production, the art that was being produced, the institutions that were being founded correspond to this change of country. So I think it was a change of country, and that's also kind of like shown in the exhibition. One of the very important things that Irene and I talked about, and that is something that has kind of like become an obsession for me, was to ask the artists ourselves to reinterpret our own work 20 years later. And also that's something that's rarely done. There's always this kind of like outside gaze that comes in and looks at work and maybe produces different meanings. And in this case, we were invited to interpret our own work. And so Katia, did this performance for the opening that, by the way, broke Amy's nose, which is, something that that's like the funny part. Amy Sarah Carroll, who was one of the persons who wrote one of the texts in the book, was there for the opening and, closing, right. Yeah, the closing of the festival. And so maybe Katia can talk a little bit about that work that she produced, which was her reinterpretation of her own work back in the 90s. And I mean, long story short, Amy got on a mechanical bull and ended up with a broken nose. So that's her, what she took home, among the other things from that experience. But I like the idea of us being able to interpret our own work. We were always very much about artists talking for ourselves. That's what Exteresa was about, and that's, for example, something that the historical narrative has erased. Exteresa was a space constructed by artists for artists. And it wasn't, as many accounts say, like a government space. It was more about us doing this thing that in English is called taking the money and running, which is saying, taking the infrastructure to do whatever we wanted to do with that infrastructure. So it wasn't really a government space, and that is often forgotten in the narrative. And so again, in the show, that spirit is also here. And for me, it was also an opportunity to engage in conversations with friends and colleagues that I respect and love, and talking about things that we had never talked about. So I sat in Tepoztlán with Silvia Pandolfi, talking about the 90s in a way that I had never done and probably never will. And had this not opportunity presented itself, I probably wouldn't have had that conversation with her, or with Eduardo Avaroa, or with Pilar Villela, or with Monica, and with other people who have been completely erased from the map. And I also want to bring them here somehow, and that's Hortensia Ramirez. Hortensia was the first person she was the person who initiated the performance festivals in Mexico. She and Gustavo Prado started them. And because she's not part of any circuit, because she just kind of like completely removed herself, she's been erased from history. So I want to bring her here also as an act of love. And so I'm about to finish. And the last thing that I think this show did for me and it's something that also happens with the show that's so organized at MUAC, is that it's a conversation with the people who are no longer here. But it's also about a conversation with the people who are still here but were different back then. So, for me, the Museo Salinas has this whole personal history. I was married to Vicente back when I wasn't gay, another lifetime. But yeah, I mean, this is what these exhibitions are about at the end also. They're not only about a political statement or an artistic statement, but they are also about the relationships that we have and the people who we are and who we change throughout time. So for me, seeing this show was a conversation with, the Vicente I knew back then, or the Elvira I knew back then, and so or Sonido Apocalitzin that has had this huge comeback. Sonido Apocalitzin is this DJ group, the DJ band that Vicente is a part of, and they put together this room at the Armory, and so now they've had this big comeback. But again, it's an active memory to recall and remember what they represented. So it's a conversation with our loved beings. It's a conversation, and that is to say, it's a conversation with our community, the community that we had back then, some of which survives, and some of which has morphed and changed into very many things. But it is a conversation with that community. So I'd like to leave it at that. I would love for the other people who were there to bear witness with me, and then we can continue inviting all the other people who are not here. Thank you.
That was amazing, Lorena. Thank you. There's so much that I want to respond to, but I'll hold on to it for the moment. But I want to introduce as well Michelle Fiedler. I mentioned that the research for this project took place in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. Michelle is a curator based here in Mexico City who took on Monterrey. And maybe you can speak to that or whatever aspect of this project drew you in, and I'm curious to hear where it's taken you as well.
Thank you. First of all, sorry. Sorry, I got the time confused in my head. Sorry. But I'm here, that's good. So, yes, the invitation started as Irene was starting her investigation, and she knew that she did not want to focus only on Mexico City, as it's part of the mission maybe of the exhibition to show all of these other things that were going on and that were not very well documented, right? So after a while, I think she proposed to me something that was very interesting, which was to go to Monterrey and investigate what was going there in the 90s. And something very magical that happened as a researcher and as a curator is that we knew the question that we did not know the answer to. And the question that we didn't know the answer to was who were the groups? Why were they working as groups? It wasn't really documented anywhere, and I think it came actually from my relationship with Tercer Un Quinto, who are artist collective based in Mexico City, but they started in Monterrey. And a few years before the research, I had conducted an interview with them, and they said, no one knows about the stories of the groups. When you talk about the groups, you talk about Mexico City groups of the 60s and 70s, but you don't talk about the 90s groups in Monterrey, which were very based on, collaborations that started to happen in the universities. So that's how it started. And after that, trying to research it, which I think has a lot to do with your essay, Lorena, and with what Monica says, like you quote her throughout the essay, and I think Mariana Botey also says it a lot. She recently in CITAC, was very poignant about it. Everything that's left out, that has been left out of history when talking about, all of these exhibitions that have been done about Mexico in the 90s, and Monterrey has never really been too much spoken about. You only get maybe Mario Garcia Torres, like artists that have made it, really well in an international sphere. So starting to read the books about Monterrey in the 90s, there was nothing about these groups, only their names. So what became the most interesting thing was that I wanted to write the essay and I wanted to do the investigation for you, Irene, that I couldn't find, So all the stories, so I think my essay, it's a bit tedious in that or not tedious, but it's just like, it's a lot of stories of things I did not know, of stories of places I was not there, It's a lot of conversations with the artists, which I think it's the best thing. That's coming directly from them. There's a lot of paragraphs that are just, huge quotes. And in a way, they were kind of they made a map for me to fill with a lot of imagination, and as you say in your essay too, with expectation, maybe some not necessarily voluntarily lies, but all the mysticism of them got into me. So what I wrote about mainly were three groups: Caja, Marcela y Gina, and Los Lichis, which is also a music group. We found, or they told me, that they were really, I think it was very important for them too, to make a connection between the industrial background of the city, that was the people who were, funding the institutions, and them wanting to work as something outside of the industrial, outside of the institutions, and as groups, which was not what was happening. And there was a lot of, I think, especially with Marcela y Gina and Caja, there was a lot, and another artist that was not part of a group, but I think he was very important for public art in outside of institutions, and kind of it being a political protest, who is Juan Jose Gonzalez, Juancho, amazing. I would love to kind of tell a bit of all of these stories, but I will be happy. I don't think we have time, right? So yeah, I'll be happy to send you the text. But yeah, I mean, can I just read one of the things that Marcela says, that Gina says when she's introducing how they started? That's Marcela y Gina, because I think it's beautiful, and I'll just end there and we'll talk, okay?
And it'll all look like
Okay, so this is the story of how Marcela y Gina got started. Marcela y Gina, two artists, students at the time at the public university in Monterrey. They decided to start working together on Christmas Day of 1997, and this is how she tells the story. It was Christmas Day 1997, and we both felt bitter about the world. Monterrey was in a moment of change. They were trying to bring together San Pedro Garza Garcia and Monterrey, two cities separated by the mountain range via a tunnel. During the construction, the workers started forming artificial mountains, mounds of dirt, next to the avenue. Even though we have such beautiful, monumental, natural mountains all around, we hold on to this artificiality, the idea of the modern, of progress. Why did wealthy people need a shortcut? They should use the same road everyone uses. This tunnel was not for everyone, not for the poor. You could not walk through it. It was a benefit for the rich city that wanted to be connected to the working city without having to go through one of the poorest neighborhoods in Monterrey. So we decided to declare these mounds left over from construction as art and give them to the city. We wanted to wrap them in plastic. But as we started to climb, it became clear that they were not going to be able. They were falling apart, about 10 meters high of the shredded interiors of mountains. On the top, we found a piece of cardboard, and with the black spray paint we had brought, we wrote art on it. We wrapped ourselves in the plastic wrap, stood there, and waved to the cars. They honked their horns and yelled. It was very intuitive, no scripts. After that, we started to use ourselves, our bodies, and actions. So that was their first action, and that's, I think it says a lot about them being together doing this kind of impossible action that they wanted to do to climb this mountain, but also starting to use their bodies to kind of make a political critique of the city, of everything that was going on, because there was a lot going on in Monterrey at the time. So, yeah.
Amazing, thank you. So you can see why the turba, becomes such a important visual and poetic and conceptual reference for me throughout the course of all this process. And the idea of original research, you mentioned that, trying to find information about artists that you were taking on this, exploration of and not finding anything. I think it's a very important thing. I think there's a lot about the 90s that have been canonized, and it is an unavoidable irony that we're sitting in this hall of commerce and hall of canonical practices, talking about work that in the context of a kind of anti-canonical, research project, but at the same time, I think taking the ideas generated by this research as itself a kind of invitation, just as I think there was such a strong, I perceived a strong spirit of invitation in so much of the work that drew me into this research to begin with. Again, back to the very original rooftop piece by Grupo Incidental that I mentioned originally. It was the result of being offered an invitation to go see something, and I think there's a kind of spirit of generosity in this work that makes that invitation a strong metaphor for me. Also, as we move forward with this production that we've created. I do want to stop for a moment and ask any of the artists that have been involved with this project who are in the room to speak if you want to. I'd love to hear from you if you have anything to add, and if not, we will... Yeah, you want to speak, Katya? Okay, wonderful. Speak in whatever language is most comfortable for you, and thank you again for indulging my incomprehension.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see a lot of friends from different times, actually. This is one thing that, as Lorena was saying, is bringing with these efforts to materialize ghost actions through time, and that's wonderful. I will say two things that for me are important upon this experience, this invitation. First, the idea to have a dialogue with one old piece and try to connect it again as myself change now after almost 20 years or 15 years. It was very, very interesting. In a way, also shows me something that is always around me, that is the feeling that, in a way, I just produce one piece fragmented in all the actions and one piece in life. That's the same piece, in a way. Any piece of myself is the same piece. How unfold is what can change and occupy other identities, but it's the same in a way. With this particular piece, which was Excivilización, Las Perras en Celo, which is complex piece, for me was very interesting to show, to explore the hidden places of that concept that I was working on. And then I chose to relate specifically with one part of the piece that was the photographs that I took with 64 different objects hanging from my labias. Because in the original intention, I wanted to project these photos one near the other for create a simulation of a coliseum with these arches and like this architecture of the flesh who was trying to impulse this image of the coliseum that in the original action was not explicit, because the ritual space that was in the middle of these photos, of these images, was a ring, as the ritual space where we used to purge the tension and the contradiction of the present. But in this time, then I chose to work with the mechanic ball, also referring to this space that I was wanted to create. And this was always difficult to create because project so big, so many images is not easy. Maybe now with the mapping is easier, but this was not easy. Actually, my first proposition was to make it in a public space. That this was totally interesting to me because this was going to intervene the streets in Pasadena, outside of the Armory, and invite and involve the people who was around. This was under censorship. This was not possible. Then I came inside. But this what I was able to develop through this dialogue with my piece and show another hidden space of the whole concept was very interesting for me. Was an opportunity to feel this connection still alive because it's one piece at the end. This is what I feel. I do just one piece forever and ever under so many disguises, but the position is there, the necessity is there, and the world, even if it was different, and I think it's very interesting what you was mentioned about Pilar Villela, that Mexico was changing because this is the neoliberalism, the after NAFTA and all these, but at the same time the contradiction is just more extreme polarized, but it's the same. We are facing the same exclusion, the same post-colonial politics, the same situations that are putting us against the wall. So this was very, very interesting to me with this invitation. And the second thing that I want to say is that the way you develop the research with us or with me, and I guess with everyone who was giving the content to this research, was very serious and very surprising. I feel like the institution and the museistic initiatives are always using the contents without giving them the right space for think about themselves and decide how we want to be in the museum or in the gallery. And I think with your research, and I want to recognize that because it was like that, and I live it in this way, I think was very delicate, very serious all the time when you came to my house, Irene, and talked to me about really what I wanted with a piece in the museography, in the curatorial level, that this was surprising and amazing, and I really appreciate. Because in comparison, and I will say it, with the exhibition that was opening last weekend, I will say it, this was, we was not even contact. and this is for me something that support what I am saying with the previous experiences. So I want to thank the serious, the respect and the dignity that you treat us as contents in the research. So this was not really like lamer el culo, but this is verdad. This is verdad. This happens. Sorry, I can't translate that, but you can translate to Irene. Better not myself because sounds good. Okay, I give it to Monica.
I just want to second her motion. And also, thank you for doing the research, how it was done, and thinking of an exhibition which for a long time I had absolutely no idea what it would end up being. Yeah, but that was wonderful. I think it's also a support because all the invisibility happens because we don't do our own history here, and I understand we don't do our own history here because there aren't the conditions. The exhibition last weekend at the MUAC, which has a lot of defects, I don't know if you'll get to see it, but shows this. We give you these tiny little pieces for everyone to be in, and absolutely no respect. But it wasn't done by Ex-Teresa, who should have done it in the first place. So we can't really complain about this institution that is doing it. And I always think, particularly in this context, that we have what I call the Grand Tour phenomena, that once the information of our art goes to the United States or to Europe and is analyzed, then it comes back here and they pay attention to it, which is like with oil and gasoline. We send you oil and you return gasoline. But the only way it becomes legitimized is when this happens. And it's always fine if it's like a complicity, and if there is the work between the people who are working over there and here, and we're not just seen from outside, but there's a work from both places. So I appreciate it also very much.
Thanks. Lorena just translated your gesture, which I kind of got. I kind of understood that. Thank you both. Thank you, Monica and Katya. Oh my gosh, again, that's left me with so much. I think, I don't know if I'm going to get to MUAC to see the show. I was very interested to see that project was underway, archival material from this time. I have been anticipating, since I started this research, several critiques around it. One being a clear, obvious outsider to the work that I was drawn into studying. You talked about a change of country, invoking, I think, Pilar, and the outside gaze, which I can't deny, despite a very deep involvement with a similar practice in the U.S. at a similar time and a decade earlier. And also a criticism of producing a project that might set itself up as being somehow definitive or a last word on a subject. And to the first potential criticism, which I haven't actually received, even though I may have not heard about it, I feel like I can't do anything other than what I've done, which is acknowledge it and maintain what I hope is a respectful curiosity and a respectful gratitude, again, for the invitation that I've been extended so many times. And for the second, the idea of a definitive project, as I've said here, it can't possibly be definitive. It's something that is meant to move forward just like the work itself has done. And so thank you for prompting those comments with the comments you made. And I know our time is, are we done? Are we 3 minutes, or do we have 3 minutes, or do we have no minutes? We have no minutes. Okay, so if anybody, I'm going to end in a minute, within 60 seconds. This was for anybody who's interested in getting more information. Michelle mentioned sending her text. I would love to let you know when the book is available if you're interested. And so if anybody wants that, let me know. And again, thank you to everybody for putting this on.